Welcome down to my 9-foot homemade oak bar. Pour yourself a cold one. You are listening to Bucks in the Basement. My name's Chris, and Craig here is the biggest Pirates fan you'll ever meet. Let's talk Pirates baseball now. Welcome to Bucks in the Basement.
Now I see the changes in this town. They change, they say one thing, but then the next day it's different. They change, but they don't know what they want. All they do is change. Going left, going right, travel day, travel night. That's where we'll go. No excuses, no goodbyes, no one cries, no one lies. We'll never know.
Everybody always tells you that podcasting is easy and it will be fun. And as Scott, my guest tonight, we are learning it is not. I am recording from the balcony of my condo here down in South Myrtle Beach. But I had to jump on to talk Pirates because, hanging out with my family, they are not the biggest Pirates fans in the world. They don't, they pretty much stare there blankly at me and are like, can we just talk about something else? But the Pirates right now, as they sit, talked to Scott about this beforehand, is that, where they were at this point in the season, the way that we would look at it is we would be happy because, they are 2 games over 500. They're 2.5 games out of the wild card as we record here at about 10 o'clock on August 1st. And that they would, want to, see more from a team. But Scott from at Pirates Takes, what are you thinking about how we are at in the season right now?
Well, we've had a lot of ups and downs throughout the season. They can never seem to put everything together. Either the pitching is electric and the hitting just can't find itself, or they explode for 10 runs and the pitching bullpen in specific, kind of stumbles. I think that as we're going on, we're seeing the team gel more, and that's reflected in the standings, in their record, and with the trade deadline just passing us, one can only hope that things are going to get better going forward.
Yeah, and I just realized I did a podcasting faux pas. I didn't introduce you. I didn't tell anybody who was going to be talking, but as everybody knows, at this point in time now, Scott Jackson at Pirates Takes, first guest here, time on the show, first time guest. And he did dabble in the podcasting world a little bit previously. And I'd reached out to him, and he has been gracious enough to jump on here. And I forgot to ask you, how you doing, brother?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good, man. Like I said, we're going through a little bit of choppiness here in the video, in the recording, and I'm guessing that everybody is probably watching the Wi-Fi, using the Wi-Fi in the condos here to watch the Olympics and everything. But yeah, as we were saying, there is some stuff going on with this team that they are struggling in different places. They are, having some issues that possibly can be overcome. They've made some moves to improve the team, but at other points in times, it is, you're talking about, you mentioned the relievers. Relievers are inconsistent. It's not going to be, a constant. Even a guy who kind of has a great record or a great ERA or a great WHIP. there are going to be some ups and downs with that. We've seen that with Colin Holderman lately. Colin Holderman came in, house of fire, and then has gone through some struggles. But if you look at his overall numbers, everything kind of looks good. Same thing with David Bednar. The one that really sticks out to me is I always look at Aroldis Chapman's whip, and it still sticks around like 1.5, even when he seems to be pitching better. But I mean, we can kind of go to the trade types of things because there were some acquisitions that were made to improve the team. There were some minor bullpen moves, but a lot of this was kind of about the offense and seeing, how they can improve things, even if it's a guy like, a Brian De La Cruz who has been, right around I guess it's like 100 WRC plus. He's just a little bit around, above league average in his OPS. We're going to see we're going to see Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, at some point in time here. But it's also been at times, the hitting has come along and then even the bullpen falls away. So, I mean, are we expecting too much consistency from those guys in the bullpen, or is it just the frustration because we are so close to actually? I mean, we are competing, but really competing this season.
I think that's a great point. That's the beautiful thing about baseball is the long season. Things seem to even out over the course of the season, and like you said, when the bullpen stumbles, it it costs the games because that's later in the game, more pivotal parts in the game. And so, with today's world of social media, you see people expressing their frustrations. Like you mentioned, Colin Holderman coming in last night, giving up that home run and a big part in the game. Now, it's not his fault that he was in a position to do that, but of course, he's the one that threw the ball and it went over the fence. So I think that, and to your point about Brian De La Cruz being acquired and being league average, the Pirates desperately needed league average in the lineup in that position. And so, yeah, I think that, back to that point where baseball, in the long run of the season, things even out. You'll see that Chapman, like you mentioned too, he's got a lot of experience. He's got a long track record. So I think that it's easy enough with social media the way it is today to focus on the micro when baseball is more of a macro sport. And it is easy to get caught up looking for that sweep. Now, if you would have told me a few days ago that the Pirates were going to go into Arizona and go into Houston and come out with a split on the road trip, I think, to your point before, Pirate fans would have been happy. But that is the curse of having a good team, I think. I was telling a friend this morning that because the Pirates are in all of these games, we almost expect them to win all of the games. And that just doesn't happen in baseball. You're going to have
Yeah.
those issues where, a bad pitch is going to be thrown and you're going to lose some heartbreakers. And last night was one of those heartbreakers.
Yeah, it definitely was. There's a lot to take away from. I guess it would be like you're talking about, like each game, each thing that's going on, and we can even talk about the trades to a degree. Like, I mean, if you had told me that we were going to get Brian De La Cruz for Jung Shuk Shim, who has pitched pretty much, I believe, 9 innings in the minor leagues so far, his stuff is electric. He is, only 20 years old, but and Garrett Forrester, and you're getting a guy who would improve your team. And the way that you're talking is because we've had guys that for the entire season that have been performing, well below league average. We've had guys that are struggling. I mean, I was looking at, Connor Joe here at this point in time. I'm looking at the entire season, and Connor Joe has about like a 98 WRC plus, but that is because he had 120 or 30 some WRC plus to start the season, and it's coming back down, and you're hoping to get those guys, that are on their upswing. people will say that it's not enough, but it also with some of those trades, it kind of seemed like I had conversations with people, and it kind of seemed like the Pirates didn't have necessarily the types of pieces that the teams wanted in those trades. So I don't know if it was, you know, for lack of effort on Ben Charrington's part or lack of, wanting to take on contracts or whatever it may be. The one specific example of that everybody talks about, the Jazz Chisholm trade. They were looking for a catcher back in that trade. And it looks like it's a catcher that is on the rise, is close to major league ready. And they could have taken on, Omar Alfonso, an Axiel Plaz, somebody like that who is a lot lower, but it didn't seem like that maybe would match. And it could have been Henry Davis, and they may not think that Henry Davis is going to stick a catcher, and they were specifically looking for a catcher. And then the other one, Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, getting him for, Charles McAdoo, who is, the prospect darling. The number of guys that we've seen come up to Altoona, show off in Altoona. We've seen Matt Gorski do it. We've seen Matt Frazier do it, and do it for part of the season when they come up. But once the league adjusts to them, or once they move up to AAA, we see their warts and different stuff like that. Like I wish McAdoo nothing but the best, but to get somebody in like the 13th round who you did not expect this from, and to be able to get a major league baseball player who, I looked at Baseball Reference War, Kiner-Falefa, because he plays such great defense and is having his best offensive season, would be one of the top players, if not the top player on this team this season. And to get him for a guy that you're not sure can make that jump, I mean, man, I don't know. I feel like I'm rambling here a little bit and trying to justify some of that stuff. But I'm wondering what you think about kind of the trades that were made, Scott.
Well, yeah, I agree. As high as I was on McAdoo, getting someone who was drafted so recently, and giving them up for somebody who's hitting 292 in the major leagues. But we've learned the hard way in Pittsburgh that there's no such thing as a sure thing. There's one Paul Skeens. And so we saw somebody like Rowansi, who looked lights out at AAA. And McAdoo's doing this at AA, just recently promoted to AA. So you take Rowansi, who seemed like a sure thing at AAA, and then he comes up to the major leagues and just can't put it together, at least not in the time frame that Pittsburgh needed him to. So if you can give up even promising prospects at this point in this race to get somebody that could potentially put you, because let's think of it, as it's been said in the national media over and over again, in a short series in the playoffs, you don't want to face the rotation that the Pirates have. Nobody would want to face Paul Skeens, Mitch Keller, throw Jared Jones or Bailey Falter even in that mix. Luis Ortiz, the way he's been pitching, you don't want to face that in a short series in the playoffs. So the Pirates need to finish the marathon strong and then hope that the pitching can carry them through the sprint that is the playoffs.
I mean, I would totally agree with that. And some of the other trades that they made, I mean, I went on social media and bragged a little bit because it was a type of trade that I was kind of calling for, because we do have so much depth with the pitchers, and to trade them for, a bat that is in the upper minors. I mentioned Quinn Priester, and I only said Quinn Priester's name because of who you mentioned in Luis Ortiz, and Quinn kind of being maybe the odd man out, and not saying that Quinn won't be successful. He's shown flashes where he can perform pretty well, at least in small sample sizes. But to be able to trade him for another guy who is a first round draft pick, was a younger guy, still is a younger guy, in Nick York, a guy who shows good bat to ball skills, is hitting well, at AAA this year. It's something that is I'm glad to see that type of thing happen because our AAA team was like so barren of talent. And then taking, Patrick Riley, a guy who I had raved about on Minor League News and Brews a couple of times. I saw him at the prospect game. I mean, leading the Pirates minor league system in strikeouts, does have some control issues, but a guy that is at, high A Greensboro, you don't know what's going to happen to him as he takes his next two steps up, if he takes those next two steps up, because you never know about injuries, performance, anything. And you get a player who is kind of, in some ways, I know that one's a little bit older. He's 25 years old. I'm talking about Billy Cook. He's not one of those big names from the Orioles, but is a guy that is performing well at the upper minors. And it's a bat, and we don't have a lot of bats backing stuff up. You have all this pitching depth. I mean, when Jared Jones comes back, and they still, Marco Gonzalez, if he would stay healthy, I mean, you're still looking with Priester and, Martin Perez gone, you are still looking at, what can be a 6-man rotation at times. So, and then you still have, Thomas Harrington getting promoted to Indianapolis. You have, however many innings you can get from Mike Burrows, Braxton Ashcraft. You see, a guy that, people were asking who he was in Jake Woodford starting a game. You needed some of those bats. Do you agree, Scott?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that so much of the focus in the trade deadline comes to buyers and sellers, who's going to make the big push to go to the playoffs. But what we saw at the last few minutes of the trade deadline and before with the Nick York is a couple of teams making baseball trades. The Red Sox giving up Nick York for Quinn Priester. Now, Nick York, he slots into the number 5 prospect in the Pirates, according to MLB Pipeline, before their midseason reshuffle. But he slots into the number 5 prospect in the Pirates system. And Luis Ortiz making Quinn Priester expendable because of the performance and the way he slotted into the rotation. You're seeing teams trading from strengths to improve weaknesses. So we're able to add a bat that can play second base, that can play outfield. And that became a bigger need with Nick Gonzalez getting injured. We just don't know how long he's going to be out. And like you said with Patrick Riley, yeah, the same kind of thing. The Orioles need pitching, and they have bats. The Pirates are the inverse. It's nice to see it's not just about buyers and sellers for the rest of the year. It's about stocking the system so that you're in a good position, not just for this year. That this is the opening of the proverbial window for the Pirates, but you don't want it to be a 1-year thing. You want to make sustainable winning opportunities year after year. And we saw the Pirates not only put themselves in a better position for the rest of this season and into the playoffs, but to be a better organization and a deeper organization going forward.
Yeah, and I had put on our notes when we were talking about, 2024 is not, the final year for this franchise. It's not all or nothing this season. I think that people expected, more splash moves even around Major League Baseball. All the big names that were put out there, like at least a decent amount of them, like Brett Rooker did not go anywhere. Luis Robert Jr., did not go anywhere. So these other guys that you kind of were looking for the Pirates to add, maybe they could have gone and blown people away with certain trades. But, I mean, I had talked to some White Sox people. I had, James Fox from Future Sox on here and stuff like that. And they said, we're looking for bats. Like, we weren't looking for pitchers. Like, our system is like stocked with pitchers. I mean, and it was the same thing kind of with the Marlins system. I know that they did go for Shim, but I had heard that they were looking at Shim. This is like after Shim was traded, that they had been looking at Shim in the offseason for some trades. So it was a guy they kind of had targeted and gone after again. But a lot of the other trades that were happening, it was like, okay, they were getting like a decent amount of like, bats and stuff back. It wasn't, going for those top end pitchers because it used to be before, people. I know the Pirates had been doing that with their drafts. I know the White Sox had been doing that with their trades. Two teams that I'm, familiar with. My wife's a White Sox fan. My former co-host Chris Lanuti does a White Sox podcast that I listen to. But they made those trades before, bringing in like Drew Thorpe for the White Sox. Now they've made those trades and they've kind of stocked that kind of stuff up. And now teams were saying, these systems are kind of a little bit barren of hitting. And I feel like the Pirates aren't alone in that to a degree. And if you look across, look across the minors, the pitching, it's pretty dominant to a degree. Especially, before you get to AAA. AAA, I know that pitching, they said, has taken a step back. But, I mean, it's just kind of weird when people are saying, like, oh, the Pirates are barren of this, or, we had a better, we had Bubba Chandler and we have Thomas Harrington and we have Braxton Ashcraft. Like, why wouldn't they take them? And it was like, well, they were looking for hitters, as I said previously. And then also, not every farm system is created equal. The number of times I saw people say, well, they're number 3, they're number 15, and they're number 20. We could have easily done that, or whatever it would be. It's like, well, their 3, 13, and 20 may be leaps and bounds better than ours. Do you know what I mean? Or they could be worse, or they could play a different position, and the teams are looking for something different. So yeah, it's a tough thing to do, and I feel like sometimes fans act like emotionally, and I do that myself. Like, I sit there and watch every game, and I want the team to win every game, but I also understand this process of, you can't force stuff to happen, and then also you can't, you can't force players to be good. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can help them try to be good in some ways, but there will be, players that regress, like Jack Sawinski this year. I can't tell you. I'm going to tell people right now, go back and look at the rookies of the year for like the past 25 years and find the number of guys that after that did pretty much absolutely nothing. It's the same thing as looking at a draft and looking at the first 30 picks in a draft and saying, who performed well and how many of these guys actually make it. And you look and there's only, 3 or 4 of those guys in the major leagues. Do you know what I mean? So it's a very, it's a frustrating thing. And when you're not working with a ton of money, and yes, we all want Nutting to spend more. I would rather evaluate the system and evaluate the process on, realities, not what isms. So, I mean, yeah, I think we might be on the same, page there, Scott. I think the next thing we might need to dive into is just this lineup's overall performance. And, I asked, some people before that I had on, like, who were, who's kind of like maybe, I wouldn't say holding this team back, but is like the person that if they were performing a little bit better, I mean, I look up and down the lineup and I wish everybody was, but pretty much at this point in time, it's Joey Bart and Brian Reynolds. And if you told me Joey Bart before even when we acquired him, that he'd be like our second best hitter. But I mean, looking at this lineup, I mean, how do you see this lineup overall and how they are going to, kind of maybe help out the starting pitching a little bit to get some runs on the board, because they kind of have been doing that.
Well, I think that the additions that they've made in through the trade deadline have lengthened. One of the things before Nick Gonzalez got hurt, people were talking about is he's not your prototypical cleanup hitter. I mean, he's an RBI hunter, but he's not exactly what you would hope for a number 4 hitter. Now, with Joey Bart coming along, like you were mentioning, and him providing that pop that they have so desperately needed, Maybe you can slot him into that position. So it's a lot of lineup construction and finding the pieces. De La Cruz is a big part of that. I know that maybe people who are a little more new school don't buy into the classic lineup construction. Your leadoff hitter that gets on base a lot, steals bases, puts himself in scoring position. But there's something to be said for a lot of those old school thoughts. I'm not saying that number four has to be your straight up power hitter, maybe like a Rowdy Telez, or what you would hope O'Neill Cruz would become. But uh, by strategically having better options for where guys hit in the lineup and lengthening that lineup, uh, I think they put the pitchers in a better position and put the team in a better position to produce the runs and push guys across the plate better than they have earlier in the season.
Yeah, and the thing with Nick Gonzalez is, I mean, when they were talking about you're talking about him being in the cleanup spot. I mean, he's the guy that's driving people in. It's a different, like you're saying, it's kind of like a different way of thinking about it. Like you would want more power from that guy, but honestly, what you're looking from that guy is a guy who is able to drive in the people that are sitting in front of him. And when you have you know Reynolds, with what he's doing, and whoever it may be that's sitting in front of him, the one person that sits in front of him at times, but has been pushed down the lineup at times as well, is Cabrian Hayes. I mean, Cabrian Hayes, I mean, at this point in time, for me, should be batting seventh, eighth, or ninth. I mean, I know that there's that balance, man, where you want to keep him in a spot where he's comfortable. You want to keep him in a spot where he's protected so he can kind of see good pitches and maybe kind of work out of those slumps. But then if you're saying in the same breath, we want to have people on base for, Nick Gonzalez to drive in, he's not a guy that's really been doing that. I mean, another one that's been struggling recently is Andrew McCutchen. I mean, Andrew McCutchen, I looked over his past 100 plate appearances. His OPS is well below 700. He's striking out more, walking less. Yes, I know people out there that he is getting bad calls on balls and strikes. Andrew McCutchen has one of the best eyes that I've ever seen in baseball, but it's at some point in time you have to go back to the old little league mentality of if it's close, you got to swing at it. Do you know what I mean? So like, yeah, he's
Right.
not completely hunting walks, but at times it frustrates me because it's like, Andrew, I know you know where the strike zone's at, but this guy's not calling the strike zone. You got called outside on the first pitch. Like, adjust. Do you know what I mean? Like, and don't think it's, you're going to get your call again. But with
Yeah.
McCutchen, I mean, you have a guy who I look and he is 0.6 B WAR. He is 0.2 F WAR. And did provide a spark at times during the season. But I mean, if he's not getting on base either, it's kind of tough to say, okay, Andrew, you're one, Brian, you're two. I mean, or three or whatever it would be. Brian Reynolds is usually two. It's a tough way to start the lineup.
Yeah, and I think that comes back to what we were talking about earlier in the season or earlier in the podcast here is that it's a long season. And Andrew McCutchen is 37 years old. I'm 37 years old, and I know how I feel physically, and I'm not a professional athlete. So it's a long grind. So by lengthening the lineup, like we talked about, then we all love Andrew. Kutch is a special player to all of us, but giving him more time off at this point in the season so that he can refresh his legs, that maybe he can unplug like Clint Hurdle used to say and get back to the Kutch that we know he can be. I think that could be an important part in going forward, and I think we have more guys now that can fill that role of DH. I look forward to seeing more guys get a position. And if I can go back to the Nick Gonzalez number four spot thing, just real quick, another thing that popped into my head here is that when it comes to the lineup construction, you don't want to have O'Neal Cruz and Rowdy Tellez hitting back to back. I think that's why we saw Nick hitting fourth to get a righty to break up those lefties. And with Joey Bart becoming the everyday catcher as a right-hander, being able to put him in that position, I think Nick comes back. You can have him in a more natural position in the lineup for him. And like you said, he is, the RBI guy. But with the OBP that we've been seeing from guys like Rowdy, if he can get on base in front of Nick, still giving Nick the opportunity to drive in some runs, I think is going to make the Pirates a deeper, longer lineup that's going to produce more runs.
Yeah, and the one thing that we didn't really touch on much, I mean, we talked about some struggles within the bullpen. With Hunter Stratton coming back, Hunter Stratton has been, is somebody who we really didn't expect to be as good as he was, and that we would miss him as much because, I mean, he was one of those guys who was a minor leaguer that didn't have the same, prospect capital or pedigree, or didn't have the same shine as a lot of guys, but you're kind of missing that stuff. I mean, missing, a Ryan Borucki and what he did for the last, what he did last year. I mean, a lot of people, Dennis Santana, who has come on and just been, a revelation and has pitched absolutely, lights out. And with Holderman struggling, I mean, I don't want to go back to that because I do believe that Holderman is a very good pitcher. He's shown the ability to do that. But going to like the starting rotation, I mean, that's the one part we didn't touch on at all was the starting rotation is that, I mean, Bailey Falcher's back. And Bailey Falcher, when healthy, I do believe that when he started to struggle, he was possibly dealing with some stuff because he's the type of guy that has to have that same repeatable extension, the same repeatable motion. And if he's not hitting his spots and he's not feeling it, then he's a guy that is kind of just, going to, he's going to look, not great. And that's, where things go. But as everybody knows here, we are 30 minutes of Bucks. It has been great to have a fellow, podcaster on, even though if he hadn't done it in a little while. For anybody that doesn't, please go follow Scott at Pirates Takes. Maybe we can talk him, back into the podcasting world at some point in time here again. Scott, any parting remarks here before we sign off for the night?
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. It's a real honor when you reached out to me to consider me to be on the podcast. I've been a big fan for a long time. So thank you so much. Excited. I'm going to the game tomorrow, so I'm excited to see Luis Ortiz pitch. And so I'm excited to continue to share my love of the Pirates with people and welcoming people onto the bandwagon. It's going to be a fun few years if they play their cards right. Just thank you for what you do for spreading the word about the Pirates. And I'm looking forward to a good stretch of Pittsburgh Pirate baseball.
Absolutely, Scott. Yeah, we'll definitely have to do this again when we have a better connection and I am back in my home recording studio. Thank you for putting up with the technical difficulties. Thank you to everybody else out there listening for doing that as well. We will definitely have Scott back again.
Now I see the changes in this town. They change, they say